Well, friends, the way that I have typically been handling these conversations is that I do a little 10-minute review of kind of everything we talked about to bring back uh, the major points. It's not going through the whole talk again in detail, but I thought if that made sense to you all, I'd just kind of walk us through some of the things we talked about and refresh our memories, and then we'll just have some conversation. Um, we started by talking about that we have to kind of reimagine the worship for the time that we're living in, that online and in person do feel a little different. And I shared with you the concept of moving a story from book to film and the translations that have to happen. One of the biggest ones is just that we have to kind of consolidate the story. To take a story from book form to film form, we have to consolidate. And this really applies to worship. I shared with you Facebook's Nona Jones giving us the recommendation that worship should be tight, interesting, engaging, and not longer than 25 to 35 minutes, with about 40 minutes as the max, as she put it. We talked about making some adaptations to the worship that we do. Uh, One of the maybe controversial ones was music and how people don't sing at home in the same way they do in the room. We talked about the importance of telling people the why when it comes to giving. So I shared the quote with you from Mike Slaughter: money follows mission, not church budgets. And we talked about the idea of either telling the story on camera or in slides or a video of where the offering is going on that day. Hi, Dick. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to the conversation. All right, we've got some folks coming in now. All right, and then I talked about some other adaptations, suggested that maybe we stop doing announcements and start doing action steps, and gave you some examples of what that looked like. And then we moved into a conversation about the importance of iterating and innovating. Uh, More than anything, I'm encouraging churches to iterate forward, not revert backwards. So we don't want to go back to where we started. I showed you a few clips from the Tonight Show and kind of showed you how Jimmy had been iterating forward, and gave you this word of caution as we go back into the buildings. Carrie Newhoff says that too many church leaders will step right back into the past the moment they step back into their buildings. And so we want to move forward, not backwards in the way that we do worship. We also talked about the importance of properly preparing. And I shared with you the most incredible saxophone solo ever to be played in online worship. And all of our ears bled and we cried a little. But I did remind you of three things you might do to improve your worship prior to it beginning. And that is to talk through your worship order, to walk through the transitions. And the Holy Spirit is our most important team member. So to pray through all of that as well. Then we talked about the idea of reimagining the experience of worship. And I shared with you the idea that when the pieces are broken and disparate and they don't have a thread that ties through everything that we do, it's really easy for people to turn it off. We talked about the fact that that in-person worship you have a captive audience and online you don't. So the more the pieces connect, the more that one thing leads into the next thing, and you have one big idea, the better. So I talked to you about four key questions to ask as you plan worship. The first was, what's the scripture and what's the big idea that it represents? And how does that play out in the music and in the spoken word and the children's sermon, if you do one of those, and then the announcements and everything that you do. Sorry, I didn't mean to show you that. Clicked on the wrong thing. You don't want to watch that, trust me. And so then we talked about what is the felt need that people are coming in with. And when we take our best guess at that, we tend to write sermons and plan worship in ways that are even more meaningful for those watching or attending worship from home. The third thing I shared with you is the idea of having a visual hook. And so what is the metaphor or story or sort of the big creative idea that makes all the pieces hang together? And then I encouraged you to always ask what the goal of your worship experience is so that people know what to do with it. And then we shifted into a conversation about three strategies for both and worship. We talked about pre-both and worship, which is worship where you have separate experiences. Online is for online, in-person is for in-person, and you don't stream the in-person. You just have your online be pre-recorded. And if you're in a rural church without much in the way of internet, that might be the best option for you. And so we talked about some challenges we have to wrestle through. So we have to consider the length of our service and how we make that work for online. Sweet spot again being about 40 minutes, whereas in person we can do the full hour or more. Singing, we talked about that a moment ago. Third thing we talked about is the sermon length. And that if you're doing a 35-minute service, you really can't do a 30-minute sermon, or it's just a sermon. One thing I want to share with you that I've heard even since I did the webinar for you all that I thought was just a really cool idea is I heard about a church that is taking their whole service after they've aired that service and breaking up the pieces. So you can watch the whole thing, or on their Facebook page, they'll post just the music or just the sermon or just the children's sermon or whatever. And it makes it really shareable and really easy to kind of, if I just want to watch a sermon and I want to share that on my timeline, most folks, if you share a 30-minute service on your timeline, say, hey, go check out my pastor's sermon, it's at 20 minutes in, they're probably not going to do that, but they may watch the sermon if it's just posted all by itself. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing and wanted to share it with you. And then finally, I talked to you about the idea of naming kind of what is the call to action that you might have people do as a result of your worship. We also talked about the fact that viewing patterns or the way people are engaging with our online worship has changed a bit, and people are watching more now on delay, more and more. Those numbers are growing. Another thing that I just saw in the news about, I guess it was on Friday, all of the major television networks, except for CBS, which tends to skew a little older, have all decided to drop the same day Nielsen ratings in favor of the DVR ratings, which I think is pretty interesting. It tells us something a little bit about the way people are consuming content where television is concerned. You know, it used to be that only the numbers that mattered were the ones the night that the program aired. That's how they counted the ratings. What they've decided to do is move away from that and look now more at the DVR numbers, because that's how most people are consuming their content. So worship is not television, of course, but the further we get into this thing, the more we're starting to see that people are watching on delay or when it's convenient for them. And so we have to begin to think about how do we account for that? And what does that look like? I don't have a great answer for you yet, but I think we should consider that the way we measure the impact we're having has to look a little different than typical. I guess part of what I want to say to you is don't be depressed if your numbers in person are down, because you may be having more reach and more impact than you've ever had, but we don't exactly know how to count that yet. But since people are watching on delay, I talked to you about the idea of creating evergreen content. And all I mean by that is that we want to make sure that our sermons and what we plan in worship is standalone enough that we're not building it on things like saying, y'all remember last week when I talked about that thing? Well, if I didn't watch last week, I don't know what you're talking about. If I'm watching it 6 months later because I searched a sermon title on YouTube and I find it, we as much as we can make things self-contained, the better it will be. And then I talked to you about the idea that we are living in a world now where, oh, I'm on the wrong camera. You're getting like the behind the scenes view here. You're not supposed to see my wall up there in the, where'd my window go so I can change that? Here it is. All right. That's my like professional looking camera. I shared with you the idea that I think we're really all longing for a relationship. So we talked about the idea of having a worship host, and I shared with you some criteria that you might consider. Someone who's articulate, who is comfortable on camera, that understands technology to know which way to point the camera and have the mic on, available on camera, but not just on camera, but in the chat and when people actually come to church. And then finally, they're in the know. I also shared with you what is probably my favorite thing about Both And Worship, and that is the opportunity to do dialogue rather than just monologue. And I shared with you one of your very own churches, my friend Kelly McCaig, who has been doing things where he'll invite people to take their phones out and worship and say hello to the people watching online. I shared with you a clip where he asked allowed people to ask questions and he answered them in the sermon. The more that we make our worship interactive, the more engaging it will be. And then we talked about real-time Both And Worship. And the idea there is that you're doing worship in a way that you're giving attention to both the people in the room and online at the same time. and you are streaming live at that point. And the way to kind of think about this, again, just a reminder, is to think about football. There's a difference between going to the game and being there at the stadium and watching the game at home. There are advantages and disadvantages to both scenarios, but they are both unique. And so the NFL doesn't just put a camera up in the nosebleed seats and that's the way they deliver the game. They have commentators and camera angles and, things like that. And so we might, again, think about how we would deliver worship for people at home in meaningful ways. And then I talked to you about the idea of the time difference. So an hour in person works really well, about 40 minutes online. We talked about either compromising your time, which I didn't think was as good an option, or maybe even doing a staggered approach where you start your in-person at a certain time and then you join that in-person worship a little later online. So you cut out some of the singing and maybe cut out the song at the end and even the announcements. We're almost done. We talked about that not everything translates in the room. And so we might begin to think about how to create alternate moments for people watching at home. So when you're doing things like communion or anything in the room that takes a while, that while you're sitting in a living room is easy to turn off. Since I've been with you all, I've added a different example of this, but here's a church that collected 600 backpacks, and I won't show it for time's sake, but there's a video that they recorded that they showed online about the process of collecting the backpacks and who they're working with and what goes in the backpacks and so on. The room never sees it. It's more inspiring to watch the backpacks come up, but at home, I'm more engaged by a video that kind of tells that story. And then I talked about melding 4 congregations. You've got the people in the room. You've got the people who are watching from home that are connected to your congregation already. You've got first-time visitors or guests that are watching online or at your church in person. And you've got those who will watch on a time delay. So as we begin to think about worship, how can we do things with all 4 of those audiences in mind? And I shared with you, again, Kelly did a series where he used rhythm, and we talked about, they handed out tambourines in the room, but then they also did send ahead kits, and then you could get one from home or encourage people to bang on a pot or a pan. And then, of course, that works for the people on delay too. All right, and the last one here is what I called post both and worship. And the idea behind that was that you would just set up cameras on Sunday morning and do worship for people in the room, but you would record all that and then air it at a later time. I have a church here in my conference, a small country church. This will tell you everything you need to know about the church. Their name is Farmersville United Methodist Church. And they are actually doing worship at 9 a.m. and they do about a 45-minute service. And they do a couple pre-edited things. So they've got a program kind of with some announcements ready and a couple other little things. And then they do their worship live and record it. And then they drop the pastor's sermon and a couple of the songs into that program. So 9:45, their worship ends. They take that stuff, put it into the program. And then by 11 o'clock that morning, they then air their online worship, which is a scaled down version of their online or their live service. So that's one example of, and they're not super technically savvy. They don't have fast internet. They're not a really edgy church. They are Farmersville United Methodist Church doing this from out in the middle of nowhere. So the last thing I want to share with you here, I guess there's one more thing before the last thing. Just some general effectiveness tips that I talked to you about. Speak to now. So what we are going through right now, Jesus has something to offer it. So don't ignore what's happening in the world around you. Build an intentional chat strategy. So have people hang out and relate to people there. Use social media to encourage people to do hashtags and watch parties and invite them into your experience of church. And then create a plan to connect with people. We don't want our online experience to just be a big revolving door. And then I'm also a proponent of getting an outsider's perspective. So you might ask somebody that's not connected to your church to watch and give you some thoughts on what they experience. Do they understand what your rituals are and who people are on the screen and so on? Now, truly, the final piece is what I call the both and audit. By the way, all this was in the handbook that you received when you attended the event. So you'll be able to find all this there. I suggested that you have advocates for both the in-person experience and the online experience. Somebody has to care most about that online audience, and somebody has to care most about that in person as you're planning worship and to go back and forth. And then these are the 7 questions I think you should ask every time you plan worship. What is the purpose of this aspect of worship, and does it translate to both audiences? Actually, all 4 audiences. Does this moment belong in both experiences? Not everything belongs in your online experience that happens in your live experience, and vice versa. Is there a participatory or interactive way of doing this? People don't want to just show up and watch your program. They want to be participants in it. The 4th thing is this too short or too long for either audience? Some things could be too long for online and too short for in person. How does this translate on screen, and do we need an alternate moment? Does this need any additional contextualization for either audience? And then the final question is, how will first-time viewer or in-person guest receive this? And then I left you with the final thought from Carrie Newhoff, who says that right now pastors are using online to bring people to the building, but in the future, he really believes that we'll use the building to get people to watch online. And there are lots of reasons for that, because some people never walk into our buildings, and we have the opportunity to engage and interact and do all kinds of new things. And younger people hang out online, which is also kind of an advantage to that. So I hope that we'll all stay committed to doing both and into the future. All right, there is our there's our recap. So again, I just wanted to go over that, so maybe it might spark a thought or a memory that you have. But my first question that I'd like to ask you all, and I'll give you a minute to think about this, is there anything that you tried after the webinar that you experimented with, and maybe it worked or maybe it didn't work, or something you wanted to try but haven't had a chance to yet? You know, I want to hear from you all. What are some of the things that you picked up from the webinar, and did they work or not? So you can, there's not so many of us that it's not hard to manage, but if you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself, or, all right, Blaine, go for it.
So there were several things that I implemented right away. And one of the things that I really appreciated was you giving me permission to dump the announcements, which I had at the end of the service in the old days, BC, before coronavirus. For some reason, it seemed like I needed to move them up to the front again when we were online, and I was never really happy with it. And when you said that, it's like, okay, that's it, doing that. So, and I am intent, you know, I don't announce everything every time. I tie it to whatever's happening. So that's been good.
Excellent.
I did some other things. I don't even remember what all of them were. We haven't changed anything as far as bringing people into the building. We're still doing everything online. One of the things that I'm doing now is introducing everybody who's in the building. So we have a moment where, you know, the camera person steps out from behind the camera, the computer person steps out from behind the computer. Everybody comes and waves to the people who are out there in cyberspace, and so they can see who's actually here in the building.
That's a cool idea.
We had the opportunity to add a signer, a very young signer, who is not doing everything that we do, but we have a piece of music in the Lord's Prayer are signed as well as said. So, you know, there's some other things. And yes, they have worked because of whatever. Our online attendance, our viewers have gone up every week since then.
Awesome. That is so good to hear.
Our average so far this year is just about the max that we could physically fit in the building if we didn't have COVID restrictions.
Cool. That is great.
So,
well, thank you for sharing all that. You've really leaned into this, and you're seeing some results, and that's awesome. You know, one of the things that I feel like we are, again, missing so much is relationships. So the move of introducing people, I think, is actually a really cool thing. Obviously, if you had a lot of people in the room, that might get to be a bit much, but I think with a smaller group, I think that actually works really well. I've been encouraging people for a long time to if you're pre-recording anything for worship, the more faces we see from our congregation, the better. So, you know, if you're recording a scripture, maybe everybody reads it and you take a line from each person and you put together a little video that's, you know, 5 people reading one scripture or whatever. Those things go a long way in helping us still feel connected. So I love what you're doing. I think it's awesome. One word I have for all of you, and this, nothing you said actually triggered it, but I've been hearing this a lot lately, is just the sense of feeling weary and worn out. And it's been a tough year, and pastors have had to preach and edit video and plan in a different way and all that. And so, friends, I just want you to hear that, like, you don't have to do it all, and you don't have to do it all every week. You can give yourself permission to relax a little. I mean, even the team that wins the World Series doesn't always hit a home run, doesn't win every game, you know, in the season. So it doesn't have to. I feel a sense of like just overwhelmedness in folks right now, because we're putting so much pressure on ourselves. So you have implemented several things, and sounds like it's going well, and I applaud that. So anybody else have anything else that they tried or wanted to try or intend to try? Nick, go ahead.
Well, so a lot of the suggestions that you had were things we were already kind of working on, but one of the things that has come up for me is that a lot of our staff that had been doing one particular thing could no longer do their thing. The things we're trying right now is to sort of retask the staff.
Okay.
Be able to meet the challenges as they are now, not as they were, because there's just certain things that just, it doesn't work to do them anymore.
Yeah.
So, and we don't want to lose staff. We just want to retask them.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's one of the areas where we have to be malleable in this new season. And you know, the challenge with the season we're living in right now, or the time we're living in, is we had lots of time to perfect the old way. We knew we invested lots of seminary years, and, you know, there's so much theory and practice, and we're comparing something that's very mature to something that is brand new and immature. And so the ability to kind of be malleable in the moment and retask is a really great move. So, you know, again, I applaud you in that. And even as people are getting retasked, I'm sure there's some challenge with like, well, wait a minute, this wasn't my job. You know, I think we all have to sort of be aware that we don't know exactly what things look like. We're just in the infancy of this new era of ministry. So thanks for sharing.
We're eliminating our monthly newsletter because our monthly newsletter was both a celebration of what we've done and a looking forward to what's ahead, but usually a month ahead. And that can't be done now. So now we have a weekly update that we're going to send people out that is just what's coming that week. And then we're going to send a quarterly new kind of celebration of ministry.
Awesome.
We've split it into 2 things that actually ought to do 2 different jobs that we were trying to do with only one thing.
Very cool. I love that. And I think newsletter is the funniest thing I've heard all day. So that's wonderful. I'm going to remember that one, stick it in my back pocket. Anybody else? Raquel or Dick? Either one of you have anything you want to share from the last 30 days?
Well, I have to admit that I am blessed in that my tech guy won an Oscar for sound.
Oh.
So yeah. And we do have state-of-the-art equipment because he runs a company, and so he puts it in the church, and then when people from Japan or China or somebody want to see what the equipment is, he brings them over to the church. And
oh wow, what a blessing.
Demonstration. But we're trying the, you know, I've always hated announcements. Always. You know, do you know how to read? I'm not going to read them to you. But anyway, so we started, and I talked to people about it, and they were just going, oh yeah, well, we've tried that before, blah blah. Well, we had a special service, and it was doing a sermon was Pray for America, and we had some really wonderful videos and songs. And then Kim stood up and went on with the announcements. And my tech guy came up and he said, man, I hear what you're saying about announcements. If somebody had stood up and said, let's pray instead of, okay, UMW's do, you know.
Yeah.
So last week we did. We talked about giving and looked at compared Mary and the anointing of Yeshua with Babette's feast, the movie Babette's Feast, and giving generously everything you have. And after the end, we said, well, you know, there are opportunities for you to give. And then we had a person who works at a domestic shelter stand up and make her little spiel. So
Awesome. That is
yeah.
great.
And I was so surprised because my assistant came up and said, why are we doing it this way now? I said, well, we're not doing everything this way, but this works in much, much better. And I think people will be able to hear it better instead of just at the front.
Yeah. It
We've
becomes a
tried
little
that
bit
before.
more
Yeah.
organic. It
Yeah.
becomes, you know, becomes more organic when you're tying all that together at the same time. And now it feels like I'm living into a purpose rather than engaging in an announcement. And again, when you do those multiple announcements in a row that are all a different subject or a different topic or whatever, you send people in all these different directions, and then you try to reel them back in to say, oh, but here's what we're actually talking about today. So thank you for sharing that. I'm glad. It sounds like at least for this time it went okay, even if your assistant didn't quite get it.
Yeah,
Hopefully-
and we've gone ahead and we have a monitor in the narthex that kind of does a rolling announcement type thing. So they
Yep.
just start that before the music. So we're good.
Okay, very good. Dick, do you have anything you want to share? I don't want to put you on the spot.
A lot, already, since we're both in the same church, right? I'm the background guy. She's the person in front of the camera.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
one of the background people.
All right.
And I mean, really, I felt like what made a big difference was two things. One was the sign language person who's up front, and they're switching between Blaine and the sign language person. And then seeing other people walk in front of the camera as she introduces like the 5 people that are in the building. I think that personal viewage is what worked.
Good. And you know, those background people are pretty important. So don't ever underestimate what it means to be in the background.
Yeah, like it was. Sometimes I'm the only we had one time since we talked before, I was the only background person.
Yeah, our office manager got COVID, and so we had to be isolating. And so Dick and I were the only people who could be in the room. And so I preached, he did everything else. We had recorded music, which was good. The problem was it was going straight into the computer and I couldn't hear it. So I was working blind and it worked, but I don't want to have to do that again.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
We have the option to do the signer as picture in picture, but what we've done is not do picture in picture with the signer right the last couple of times we've used it.
Because we need to see her.
Yeah. Do you have much in the way of deaf community in your church or in your community?
Not really, but this family was taking a class, and this is the youngest member of the family, and she's continuing to take the class because it counts as a language.
Yeah.
And it's pretty funny because the mom, who's also the computer person, has always used it with her kids so that she can tell them across the room to shut up or whatever. But because she was here, you know, she's normally here on Sunday mornings, and I knew she knew it. I just, you know,
Hey,
it's something, and people love it, even if they don't understand it. People just love to. It adds a lot.
What a neat way to empower a young person too. So I think it's great.
Yeah,
Very
and there is a deaf school here in Santa Fe, of course. So
Okay.
so there is a local community that we may or
Very
may not
cool.
be reaching. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I have more questions that we keep running into this thing of whether it's the right thing to do to wear a mask or have the pastor wear a mask, because that means she's being good example of behavior while preaching, or have the pastor wear like a welder's. I saw one pastor wear a welder's helmet, kind of face shield, clear see-through thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
uh,
my opinion on that is that I think it's really a great thing to wear it as a symbol at the beginning, but then when you get up, you can take it off. I mean, I think we see that with politicians who are getting up to a podium to speak, and they go out of their way to spray down and wipe down. If you've got more than one person coming up there, anytime. I know anytime that the current administration is swapping out microphones, somebody comes up and wipes everything down. So I think the wearing the mask at the beginning and then taking it off when you go to preach, since there's nobody within 6 feet, feels pretty good. Nick, you have a thought?
Well, it just I can speak for my father is very hard of hearing after losing his hearing in the Navy, and if he can't read your lips, he can't tell what you said. He has the implants and all that, but he still has to read lips to really see what you're saying. So just this last Sunday, they went to a church in Virginia, and he only caught about half the sermon because he can't read their lips.
Yep. I think that's true. I know sometimes just when we'll go out to eat, like my family went yesterday to a restaurant, and my son sometimes he's not always super articulate, and they couldn't understand what he was saying because they couldn't read his lips. He was so frustrated. I'm like, well, you kind of mumbled a little bit. And I don't think we even realize how much reading lips makes a difference. So Dick, I think my response would be, I think it's a good thing to have it so that we are kind of being examples in the moment. But then I also think that you don't necessarily have to preach with it on. And for me, the face shield thing might be a little bit more distracting than taking the mask off. Again, I think as long as nobody's right up on top of the person, we're still following those distancing guidelines. So it's a good question to ask, though.
Yeah, and another thing that is very interesting is, how much do you think that lighting makes a difference? Like, looking at each other right now, you and Raquel are very well lit. From I'm looking at the thing that we're looking at, and the others are sort of pretty so.
I think lighting makes a huge difference, and so they've got all kinds of solutions that are simple. I'll show you here. I don't know if I showed this on the day that we were all together, but I'll show you my studio space here. I've got now I do video production for a living, so I built a studio in my basement to do these things. So I wouldn't expect most people to have this, but I will show you the lights that I have. So this is behind what you're seeing right now, the camera, and there are these two softbox lights here. So on the left and on the right, those big lights. Let me see if I have a better picture of them. I guess I'll walk through these real quick. Behind me is a wall that's curved at the bottom so that there's no hard edge. And so I shine light up on that. But there's one of my lights. Now these lights, I think I spent $150 on them, maybe $130 on them, on the two of them, and they're dimmable. So I can turn that up or down. And because it's got that big soft cover on it, it just gives you really nice, even lighting. And it's not real harsh. Those are the lights that are behind me on the floor. And then that's my computer. And then the two main things are having good audio and good lighting. So I've got a microphone down below my mouth that you can't really see on camera. And then that doesn't matter. And then I'll just show you this because I learned about it last year and I improved my setup. So the first webinar I did for you all a year ago, I just used my computer, but now I'm using, so this is my laptop and it's got this little red device plugged in it. And that cable right there runs up to a teleprompter. And so I've got an iPad that is actually mirroring the screen of my computer onto that iPad. And then that iPad reflects up onto the monitor. And then my camera is behind that. So part of the reason that the entire time, here, let me go back to it here. One sec. Anytime that I am presenting, right now I'm seeing all you on the Zoom screen on the piece of glass in front of me. And so I'm looking at you all right now, but it looks like I'm looking directly at you because I'm using a teleprompter to do that. Somebody posted this setup and I already had the iPad I already had the teleprompter because I use it sometimes for video production. I spent $80 on the little wire that makes it run up to the, not the wire, but the little device that mirrors it. And you can do it wirelessly or wired. When you do it wired, you don't have as much of a delay. It's a device called Luna Display, Luna, Luna Display. And I just feel like it's so important when we're presenting, or not presenting, but preaching or trying to connect with people, that you maintain eye contact. Because if I did the whole meeting like this, or my computer's actually down here, sometimes you've actually seen me look down here. I'm looking at my computer right now. And if I do that the whole time, you're going to feel fairly disconnected from me. But if I maintain the eye contact, you're going to feel. So when you're pre-recording worship, it's so important to keep your eye on that camera. And then I said this to you all during the training, but as we go back to in person, we don't want to lose that moment, because you got to preach to the people over here and in the balcony. And then also make sure that sometimes you put in your notes to look at the camera too, so that people at home feel like they're a part of what's happening as well. So I know that's not exactly what your question was, but those lights, in fact, let me, hold on just a second here. So I'm going to I just turned that light off. Look how terrible it looks.
Yeah.
I've got lights on overhead, but they're just not very, and now I still have this light on over here, which is why you see half my face. And if you didn't want to spend the money on a set of lights like this, which again, I think I spent 130 bucks on them. They weren't terribly expensive. I mean, that seems relatively inexpensive to me, given we're spending so much time online today. You could also, depending on how you're shooting, now this wouldn't work in worship, but you could, if you were pre-recording, put a couple lamps right off camera and have those near you. I've done that before, where I've been back when I used to travel before COVID. I have had to produce like a short little promo video when I'd come. Like I came to your conference about a year ago, actually. I just saw it pop up on my timeline. I came to Central to do an in-person workshop, and like I might have been in the hotel the night before, and I pull a couple lamps up and I record on my phone. Hey folks, I'm coming to your area, in a few weeks, and I can't wait to see you, and blah, blah, blah. Just having that light that is near you will make a huge difference in the way things look. So I hope I didn't belabor that point. I probably did. Other questions or comments? Was there anything else you had there, Dick?
No, I think there's so many things to process and implement. We're still in the process of not doing them, not tripping over ourselves to get everything done, but implementing them more slowly.
Good. I think the temptation is you come to a training like we did, and you identify like 5 things you want to do, and then you try to do all of them at the same time, and then you end up failing because you spread yourself so thin. So I'm always encouraging folks just to do one thing and do that for a while and get good at it and get comfortable. And then you won't give it that much more thought because you're comfortable with it. Then do the next thing, and then the next thing, and so on. Let me just ask, we've got somebody else joining us here. Let me ask another question that I've been asking all these groups. What has been the most exciting opportunity that you have seen come out of the pandemic? I mean, there's plenty of bad things. I think I saw tonight, we will have a memorial service for the fact that we've lost 500,000 people, which is an awful, awful thing. But we also have had some pretty incredible things happen. What's one thing you've been excited about, or one opportunity you see in ministry right now that wasn't present a year ago this time?
Our online presence, we record, and then Gordon does the editing and he posts it on YouTube. And one time we had 243 people watch, and
Yeah.
people from California and parents, parishioners, parents. Well, they just do it on Facebook. I don't like it, so we always watch you. And I'm really, really surprised at how far we're reaching.
One group that I did some online coaching with like this, I had a pastor point out something I thought was a really valuable insight. He said, time and distance don't matter anymore in
Right.
this new world. You know, you can be watching from anywhere and you can watch it whatever time you want to watch it. So, yes, we are broadcasting it at a certain time, but because it becomes archived, time and distance don't matter, which is why I mentioned to you all the idea of having as much as you can without it being cumbersome, that whole idea of the evergreen content that you might, you know, I might watch it a week or two or a month later. But yeah, I think, Raquel, that is a great insight. And I think we really have to consider that we can have a much larger impact now. I think the key though is that we can't just do worship on Sunday and let that be it. We have to really invite people into a relationship. We have to invite people into, you know, discipleship and missional opportunities and things like that. But wow, we have such a great opportunity now to reach even more. Blaine, I think you had a thought too.
Yeah, in addition to all the new connections, which are huge, I mean, I don't even know all the new connections we have, is the reconnections that have become possible. We've got people who are once again participating in small groups on Zoom who cannot come for whatever reason. They're homebound, they're caring for somebody who's homebound, or people who have moved away. And so members of the congregation that are somewhere else in the country are still connected with us and joining us every week. And so that, you know, in addition to the new people, we've regained some of the other people that
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for
that's-
not really lost, but that
Yeah.
weren't able to connect.
We
Good.
actually have a person that I know that is, you know, encountering this, our Zoom and Bible study and other things that will not step into a church on purpose.
Yep. Yeah. We've really opened it up for people who would never pass through our physical door. Nick, you had a comment too?
Yeah, just, and it's along the lines of what Raquel and Blaine were talking about as well, but way before COVID, Blossom and I were really wanting to create an online service with our service. We wanted to have the both and worship before COVID made it necessary. And the thing was, it was hard to ask our endowment committee for the money for it because there was no urgency.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like it was something that was necessary, at least to them. But then when COVID hit, all of a sudden it became extremely necessary.
Yeah.
And we got a disbursement of money from them very quickly, got cameras up, we're able to stop doing worship on mine and Blossom's phone. And it was really a blessing to get to do that because it's something we wanted to do anyway.
But thank goodness for those smartphones, because for quite a while that was all we had, and it worked.
Yeah,
Well,
that is awesome.
we had loss of power off and on, not as bad as what they had in Texas, but we had loss of power all day Sunday before this one. And so we were using our phones, we were using data, everything that wasn't fully into the power stuff, and it worked.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I have really thought was incredible during this season is I have heard numerous stories of churches who maybe in the past had a lot of naysayers or leaders that were like, we can't do this, or you can't do that, or you can't change this. But there's just a feeling of malleability in the church right now that I've never seen in 25 years of doing ministry. You know, church councils and boards and, you know, pastor parish committees and all that kind of stuff are allowing things to happen or cheering on pastors who are making changes and trying new things. I've been encouraging folks just to not waste this moment, because we have this moment where everyone's kind of leaning in and saying, okay, pastor, okay, let's do what we got to do. And I think you experienced that even in, they would have said no before, and now they're saying yes and making it possible. So I've just, you know, again, saying, don't waste this opportunity. What are some of the big dreams that you have? Because right now people are supporting those dreams in new ways. Other thoughts?
One thing that makes me laugh is the way people describe the time that they do watch. And so now, well, it's time for Sermon on the Couch.
Yeah. Any other, yeah, Nick?
Just a fun thing we had this last Sunday. One of our members that's been staying away from the in service because she's been nervous, and now she's had her two vaccinations. Uh, at one point, Blossom said something like, "Well, if you've gotten really used to worshiping in your robe and with your coffee, you can come that way to church." And she did. She had a purple robe for Lent, and came with her coffee and her purple robe and her mask. It was called.
Yeah. That's funny. Well, part of why what Dick said earlier, I think, is just a good word for us to consider. And that is that there are some people who never walk through our physical doors, which is why this both and thing is so important moving forward too. I really think that the future of our church looks like it looks right now. Some of us have maybe had this idea that when the virus was under control, we might eventually be able to just stop doing the online thing. But we've got folks that are now attending worship in their bathrobe at home. We've got people who never walk in our doors that are coming to Bible study and things like that, which is, I think, a pretty exciting thing. So, well, I mean, there were a couple of things I wanted to ask you, which I did, but I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to ask any additional questions that you have. I hope that you all had a good experience at the webinar and picked up a couple things. I will remind you, and Allie can probably point you to where the information is, but you do have the ability to watch the webinar again if you'd like, or share it with others. There's a 90-day replay available. The handbook link, I sent that as well. So you can download the handbook and watch it at your own pace, or share it with anybody within your own conference or in your own church. And if you down the road have a question you'd like to ask, I think my information's in the handbook. You are welcome to reach out, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Or Allie and Blossom and others have my contact info too. I don't want to cut you short, but if you don't have any questions, I also don't want you to feel like you have to hang for the next 8 minutes or whatever. So any last thoughts or reflections or questions? Raquel? Oh, you're saying goodbye. All right. Anything else you want to say before we end our time together?
I just want to mention one thing for small churches, like Nick was talking, starting with a smartphone and building up. One of the things that we added that really made a big difference was using an ATM mini switchboard.
Okay.
It was very reasonably priced, like $300. And
Okay.
that allowed us to easily switch between camera, or we could have two cameras up, and one which could be a smartphone. You can connect a smartphone to the doggone thing.
Yeah.
And then do picture in picture and then run a computer stuff. It's pretty nice switching.
Would you say that was called?
ATEM.
Okay. I haven't heard of that.
Our tech people are wanting to get a second camera, and we've got I can't remember what it's called, but we've got something that will mix it like that. And they're wanting to get a second camera, or at least an iPad that they can use to record like that.
Mhm.
I'm hoping we can do that before long, because it'll help with transitions for sure.
Yeah.
So the ATM Mini, one of the things it has, Jason, you're not familiar with, is it has the option to put up multiple slides where you can type in the whatever words you're going to have for a song, and then when it does automatically a picture in picture with the words for the song.
Okay.
But it only allows you like 20 images where you can do that.
Okay.
They have their bottom, that's their bottom model. You go up to 600, and of course they give you 100 images.
Okay.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah. That's good to know, though. I hadn't heard about that particular device. So it's got the software built in, and then you just attach your own cameras and stuff to it.
Right. You don't even need a computer in some cases. Right.
Okay. Cool. And I assume you could probably plug your soundboard into that to get a feed directly.
Yes. Plug your soundboard into it, or have no soundboard. It'll function with or without.
Awesome.
Pretty simple. A lot of the people who are doing what you're doing, Jason, use one just in their little tiny space.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Well, Ally, do you want to, if, I don't want to cut anybody off, so if you have any last thoughts, feel free to share them, but Ally,
Well,
I'll
The
give you
other
the.
thing is, if you start thinking and you have any other questions, you could always get a hold of me. And Jason, is it okay for me to reach
Yeah.
out to you? And okay,
No, I don't want to talk to you ever again.
that's it. Cut off.
I hope you'll keep talking to me. Of course, yes. Any
Well,
questions
of course.
to Ally, she can send to me.
And you're always working on new materials. So of course, if you get another webinar together, in 6 months or whenever, things keep on changing so quickly that's not so unlikely.
Yes. I had someone say to me the other day, can you look into your crystal ball and tell us what we need to do by the end of the year? My guess is as good as yours. We'll see.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to say is a blessing to me is how fast everybody got online, and the evolution that people have been doing over the last couple of months is just, I'm in a unique position that I'm on everybody's face. I mean, I see, and one of the things that I've noticed is that pastors, they first had to get into this, they had to be pastor and technological genius. And now they're sort of getting staff and volunteers around them so they can go back to this role of being prophets and poets and visionaries, the way, we count on them to sort of interpret this time. So I'm really thankful to see how some of this evolution and how it's really impacting our churches and acting in and boldly going.
It has been fun to watch. I've been cheering everybody on. You should feel good about your efforts, whatever they are, even if it's not perfect. As I said to you during the webinar, slick is not nearly as important as authentic. And what we do in front of the camera is more important than which camera you use. So whether you're doing this on a phone or a fancy setup with multiple cameras and fancy software, what you're doing in front of the camera is what really has the impact. So I'm in awe of everything you all have done. So keep up the good work.
Well, thank you all for attending. And, I know everybody's so busy, but this has been a really good conversation. And if you of people that meant to come today and they weren't able to, we'll have the recording. That just seems to be the thing. So thank you, Jason. It's so good to see you and share what you have to say. And thanks, guys.
No problem. I hope we all see each other again sometime, and keep up the great work. And I'll have to check back in on y'all and see how you're doing down the road. I'm sure you'll be doing great. So, all right. Well, have a great week and keep on giving people Jesus.